Her mother-in-law rejected her at the wedding for being poor. But she came back a millionaire. Picture this. You're standing at the altar on what should be the happiest day of your life. Your hands are trembling, not just from nerves, but from pure joy. You're wearing a simple dress, nothing fancy, but to you, it's everything. You look into the eyes of the man you love, convinced that you're finally going to build a home together. Your heart is racing. This is it. This is your moment. And then, a voice cuts through the ceremony like a knife through silk. A cold, sharp voice that doesn't belong to a stranger, but to someone who should be celebrating with you. His mother. With harsh words and eyes full of contempt, she declares in front of everyone that you're not worthy of marrying her son because you don't have money. The church falls silent. Every single pair of eyes turns to you. Shame, pain, and helplessness crash over you like waves. What would you do if, on your wedding day, the person who should protect you most rejects you in front of everyone you know? Before we dive into this powerful story, make sure to hit the subscribe button, turn on the notification bell so you never miss a story like this, and drop a comment below letting us know where you're watching from. I'd love to hear from you. This is the story of Laura, a woman who went from the deepest humiliation to a destiny no one could have imagined. Laura was born in a small town surrounded by mountains, where the air was crisp and clean and life moved at the pace of the seasons. From the time she was a little girl, she knew what it meant to struggle with very little. Her family worked the land from sunrise to sunset, their hands rough and calloused from years of honest labor. While they didn't have luxuries, no fancy clothes, no expensive toys, no vacations to distant places, she grew up with values of hard work, respect, and kindness. These were the real treasures her parents gave her, more precious than any amount of money could ever be. Her biggest dream was to study and change her life, to escape the cycle of poverty that had trapped her family for generations. She would stay up late reading by candlelight, imagining herself in a different world, a world where opportunities weren't limited by the size of your wallet. But financial difficulties forced her to work from a very young age. At 12, she was already helping in the fields. At 14, she was working at the local market on weekends. Despite everything, Laura never stopped smiling or dreaming. There was something unbreakable in her spirit, a light that poverty couldn't extinguish. Fate brought her to Pedro, a young man from the city who visited the town during vacations. He was different from the local boys, polished, educated, with an air of confidence that came from never having to worry about where his next meal would come from. But when he saw Laura for the first time, selling flowers at the market with that radiant smile of hers, something shifted in his heart. He was captivated by Laura's simplicity and pure heart, by the way she found joy in the smallest things, by her genuine kindness that asked for nothing in return. Though they came from different worlds, worlds that seemed as far apart as the earth and the stars, love blossomed between them. They spent hours talking under the trees, sharing dreams and promises. Pedro swore he loved her for who she was, not for what she had. He told her that her lack of wealth didn't matter, that what mattered was the richness of her soul. Laura believed him with her whole heart. How could she not? His words were everything she had ever wanted to hear. After several years of dating, Pedro decided to propose. For Laura, that moment was magical, like something out of the fairy tales she had read as a child. She thought that finally, after so many trials, after so many nights of uncertainty and days of hard work, life was smiling at her. She prepared every detail of the wedding with excitement, pouring her heart into each decision. Even though her dress would be simple, sewn by her own hands from modest fabric, and the celebration modest, she didn't need luxury. For her, the important thing was love. Love was supposed to conquer all, wasn't it? But not everyone agreed. Pedro's mother, Emilia, a woman accustomed to living among luxuries and appearances, whose entire life had been built on the foundation of wealth and social status, never accepted Laura. From the very first meeting, she looked at Laura with barely concealed disgust, her lips curling into a sneer that said everything her polite words didn't. She considered her too poor for her son, too common, too beneath them. Although Pedro tried to defend her, standing up to his mother in private conversations that often turned into heated arguments, Emilia pressured him constantly. She would remind him of his responsibilities, of what the family name meant, of how his choice would affect their standing in society. In silence, Laura suffered every hurtful comment, every look of disdain. She would cry herself to sleep some nights, wondering if she was truly worthy of Pedro's love. Still, she held on to hope that on the wedding day, everything would change. That seeing her happy with her son, that witnessing the pure love they shared, Emilia's heart would soften and she would finally accept their love. It was a naive hope, perhaps, but hope was all Laura had. The day arrived. Laura woke up early with her heart full of excitement, barely able to contain the joy that bubbled up inside her like a spring. Her white dress, though simple, made her look like a princess. At least that's what her friends told her as they helped her get ready. Her friends hugged her, holding her tight and telling her everything would be fine, that this was her day, that nothing could ruin it. She walked toward the altar with firm steps, her head held high, feeling like she was about to fulfill her greatest dream. The church was filled with flowers, simple wildflowers from the countryside, but their fragrance filled the air with sweetness. Pedro waited for her with a nervous but sincere smile, his eyes lighting up when he saw her walking down the aisle. For a moment, everything was perfect. The ceremony moved forward with tears and smiles, with heartfelt vows and promises of forever. Laura's father, his eyes wet with tears, placed her hand in Pedro's. The priest began the traditional words, his voice echoing through the small church, until the crucial moment when Emilia's voice echoed through the church. "This cannot continue," she exclaimed firmly, her voice cutting through the sacred atmosphere like a blade. Everyone turned in shock, the collective gasp of the congregation filling the space. She rose from her seat and pointed at Laura with cold eyes, her finger extended like an accusation, like a weapon. "My son will not marry a poor woman who has nothing to offer." The silence was absolute, crushing, suffocating. Laura felt the world crumbling beneath her feet, the ground opening up to swallow her whole. The guests' stares pierced her like daggers, each look a wound, each whisper a knife to her heart. Her face flushed red, the heat of shame burning her skin. Tears began to flow, hot and unstoppable, streaming down her carefully made-up face. The dress she had dreamed of so much, the dress she had sewn with such love and care, now seemed like a symbol of humiliation, a costume for a role she was never meant to play. She tried to speak, to defend herself, to say something, anything. But the words wouldn't come. Her throat was tight, choked by emotion and shock. Pedro, confused and pressured by his mother's force, by the weight of expectation and family obligation, hesitated. He looked at Laura, then at his mother, then back at Laura. His mouth opened, but no words came out. That instant, that moment of hesitation, was enough for Laura to understand that perhaps love wasn't enough. Perhaps it had never been enough. With her heart shattered into a million pieces, she ran out of the place, her white dress trailing behind her like the ghost of broken dreams. Her wedding had ended before it could begin. The following days were the darkest of her life, each one heavier than the last. The news spread throughout the town like wildfire, carried on the tongues of gossips and busybodies. Many looked at her with pity, their eyes full of sympathy that somehow felt worse than contempt. Others whispered behind her back, their conversations stopping abruptly whenever she walked by. Laura felt empty, hollowed out, as if her dignity had been stripped away in front of everyone. She spent entire nights crying, her pillow soaked with tears, asking herself why life had dealt her such a cruel blow. What had she done to deserve such public humiliation? But in the depths of her pain, buried beneath the layers of hurt and shame, a spark began to ignite. It started small, barely a flicker, but it was there. A tiny flame of defiance, of determination, of something that refused to be extinguished. Laura remembered her father's words, who always told her, "True wealth isn't in what you have, but in what you're capable of building." That phrase began to echo in her mind over and over again, a mantra, a lifeline. One day, looking at herself in the mirror, really looking at herself for the first time since the wedding, she no longer wanted to see herself as a defeated woman. The red, puffy eyes staring back at her belonged to someone stronger than she had realized. She decided to get up and prove she could move forward. She swore that this humiliation would not be the end of her story, but the beginning of a new chapter, a better chapter. Laura started by working small jobs, anything she could find. She sold handicrafts in the market, her fingers creating beautiful things from simple materials. She helped in a cafe, serving coffee and cleaning tables with a smile that grew more genuine each day. She saved every penny she earned, keeping her money in a small tin box hidden under her bed. It wasn't easy. Many times the temptation to give up was strong, especially on the hard days when her body ached and her spirit wavered. But her determination grew each day, fed by the memory of that humiliation, transformed into fuel for her ambition. Over time, she met an older woman named Clara, who became her mentor, her guide, her fairy godmother in a story that was just beginning. This lady, a local businesswoman with sharp eyes and a sharper mind, saw enormous potential in Laura. She saw past the humble clothes and the wounded pride to the fire that burned underneath. She taught her about business, about how to negotiate and plan and execute. She taught her about finances, about budgeting and investing and saving. And above all, she taught her about self-confidence, about believing in herself even when the world didn't. Laura absorbed every lesson with discipline, like a plant absorbing water after a drought. She took notes, asked questions, stayed late to learn more. What had once been tears of pain transformed into strength to learn and advance. Years passed, and Laura began to stand out. Her small ventures started bearing fruit. Little by little, her life changed. The humble girl from the town was building a future no one could have imagined, brick by brick, decision by decision. But the most important thing wasn't the money. It was the security and dignity she had recovered. She walked differently now, with her shoulders back and her head high. She spoke with confidence, her voice clear and strong. She had become someone new, someone better, someone who would never again allow herself to be diminished. However, the memory of that day in the church never disappeared. It couldn't. It was seared into her memory like a brand. But instead of a source of shame, it became her motivation. Every step she took, every achievement she reached, she did with the determination to prove that the woman who was rejected for being poor would one day return stronger than ever. And so, without anyone suspecting it, destiny was preparing the moment when Laura would return to that city, no longer as the humiliated young woman, but as a powerful and respected woman. Laura had decided not to give up. After that painful day, she began a new stage in her life. Every morning she woke up with a clear purpose, to build a different future. She knew the road wouldn't be easy, but the humiliation she suffered at her wedding had become the greatest motivation in her heart. At first, the challenges seemed impossible, like mountains too high to climb. She had few opportunities and many responsibilities. However, Laura discovered that inside her was a strength she had never noticed before, a reservoir of willpower she didn't know existed. With courage, she started working at everything she could find. She sold homemade bread on the streets, the aroma drawing customers from blocks away. She offered her services as a seamstress, her needle flying through fabric with practiced skill. She babysat in the afternoons, reading stories to children with the same gentle voice that had once spoken wedding vows. No job was too small for her because she understood that every step, however short, brought her closer to a new beginning. Some people looked at her with disdain, reminding her that she had been the rejected bride. They would make snide comments, barely hiding their cruel amusement at her fall from grace. But Laura no longer stopped at those comments. She had learned that other people's opinions didn't define her worth. Instead of giving up, she worked harder and with more discipline. One day, while selling handicrafts at the market, she met Clara, an older woman who ran a small food business. Clara observed the dedication and energy with which Laura served her customers, the way she treated each person with respect and kindness, the way she never let disappointment show on her face. Intrigued, she approached and asked about her story. Laura, with humility, told her about her past and her dreams of overcoming her circumstances. She spoke of her wedding day, of the humiliation, of the nights of tears, but she also spoke of her determination to rise above it all. Clara was impressed by her determination, by the fire in her eyes that no amount of hardship had managed to extinguish. She decided to give her a chance. She invited her to work at her company as an assistant. At first, Laura hesitated because she feared she wouldn't measure up, that she lacked the education and refinement that such a position might require. But Clara encouraged her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder and assuring her that the greatest talent was the willingness to learn. That was the beginning of a great change. In the company, Laura learned about organization, sales, and administration. She spent hours taking notes, her handwriting improving with each page. She observed how every detail worked, how Clara spoke to suppliers, how she managed her employees, how she made decisions. Clara became her mentor, teaching her not only about business, but also about self-confidence. "Remember, Laura," she would say, "true wealth is in what you do with what you have, not in what you appear to have." Months passed, and Laura began to excel. Her energy and dedication were so great that soon she received more responsibilities. She negotiated with suppliers, her natural charm and growing business acumen serving her well. She coordinated deliveries, managed schedules, solved problems. She attended to the most important clients, and they always left satisfied, often specifically asking for her. Little by little, the company grew thanks to her innovative ideas. But Laura didn't settle for just working for someone else. Inspired by what she had learned, she began to dream of having her own business. In her free time, she researched, spent hours at the library reading entrepreneurship books and business journals. She wrote plans in an old notebook, filling page after page with ideas, calculations, dreams. She saved every penny with the hope of investing in her project someday. The first attempt wasn't easy. With the money she had saved, carefully counted and recounted, she opened a small food stand at the market. During the first days, sales were low, and many thought she would fail. They shook their heads, whispering that she was reaching too high, that people like her should know their place. However, Laura didn't get discouraged. She remembered the moment she was rejected at her wedding and promised herself that she would never again let anyone else decide her worth. With creativity, she improved her recipes, experimenting late into the night. She offered promotions, giving loyal customers special deals. She treated each customer with a genuine smile, remembering their names, asking about their families. Little by little, people began to prefer her stand, not just for the quality of her food, but for the warmth with which she served them. The rumors that once spoke of her humiliation transformed into comments of admiration. "That young woman is strong, hardworking, and honest," they said. The business grew so much that within a year she could rent a small location. She decorated it simply, but with good taste, choosing colors that were warm and welcoming. She hung pictures on the walls, arranged flowers in vases, made it feel like home. She gave it a special name, New Hope. For Laura, it wasn't just a restaurant. It was a symbol of everything she had overcome. It was proof that she could build something beautiful from the ashes of her broken dreams. Clara, her mentor, was one of the first to congratulate her. "I'm proud of you," she said with tears in her eyes, pulling Laura into a tight embrace. "You've proven that dignity and perseverance are worth more than any inherited wealth." Over time, New Hope became a very popular place. People traveled from nearby towns just to try the food and feel the warmth Laura transmitted. She, who was once pointed out as poor and unworthy, was now respected and admired by many. The restaurant was always full, laughter and conversation filling the air, the smell of good food drawing people in from the street. But Laura didn't stop there. With her earnings, she began investing in other projects. She learned about finance, taking courses and reading everything she could find. She hired young people from the town to give them work, remembering how much she had needed someone to give her a chance. She supported social causes, donating to schools and community centers. Her name began to be heard throughout the region, not just as a businesswoman, but as a generous and visionary woman. Still, within her heart, she kept an indelible memory: the day of her interrupted wedding. That wound, though painful, was also the reason she never allowed herself to give up. Laura knew that someday life would give her the opportunity to return to that place, not for revenge, but to prove that a person's worth isn't measured by material wealth. Meanwhile, Pedro, the man who once promised to love her and then hesitated to defend her, found no peace. His arranged marriage to another young woman, chosen by his mother for her family's wealth and connections, hadn't turned out as expected. Though he had money and luxuries, a beautiful house and expensive cars, he had no love or joy. His wife was cold, distant, more interested in his bank account than his heart. Many times he thought about Laura, wondering what had become of her, where she was, if she ever thought of him. He never imagined that the woman he failed to defend was building a future that would soon surprise him. The years continued their course, and Laura became a respected and prosperous businesswoman. Her story inspired others not to give up, to fight even when life seemed unfair. But destiny, which never stops moving, was already preparing the moment when the humiliated young woman would cross paths again with those who once despised her. That meeting was getting closer and closer, and no one was prepared for what would happen. Time had passed, and Laura was no longer the humble young woman who had once been humiliated at her own wedding. She was now a woman confident in herself, with prosperous businesses and a respected name throughout the region. But beyond material wealth, what truly shined in her was her inner strength. She had learned to rise from adversity and transform pain into power. One day, she received an unexpected invitation: the wedding of Pedro's younger sister. The ceremony would be held in the same church where years before she had lived her most bitter moment. At first, Laura hesitated to attend. Was it worth returning to that place loaded with painful memories? However, after reflecting, she understood it wasn't about reliving the past, but about closing a cycle. She decided to accept the invitation. On the wedding day, Laura arrived with firm steps. She wore an elegant and simple dress, designer but not ostentatious, the kind of dress that whispered wealth rather than shouted it. Her presence transmitted authority and confidence. The guests began to murmur when they saw her. Many remembered the rejected young woman, but now they had before them a woman who emanated respect. When she entered the church, all eyes turned to her. Pedro, seated in the front row next to his mother, was astonished. He couldn't believe what he was seeing. The same woman who had once run out with tears in her eyes now returned transformed, with a dignity no one could question. Emilia, seeing her, frowned. She didn't expect Laura to appear, much less with such confidence. The discomfort was reflected on her face, in the tightness around her mouth, in the way her hands clenched. But this time her words no longer had the same power. During the ceremony, Laura remained silent, observing calmly. She wasn't seeking revenge, nor did she want to cause a scandal. Her mere presence was enough to remind everyone that life always takes unexpected turns. After the ceremony, several guests approached to greet her. Some did so with sincere respect, others with a certain shame for having judged her in the past. Laura, with kindness, smiled and thanked them. She knew that moment wasn't to demonstrate resentment, but to show the greatness she had cultivated in her heart. At the reception, destiny put Laura face to face with Emilia. For a few seconds, silence reigned. The woman who years before had shouted that Laura wasn't worthy was now facing someone who had achieved more than she could have ever imagined. With a trembling voice, Emilia tried to break the ice. "Laura, I didn't expect to see you here." Laura looked her directly in the eyes and responded with serenity. "Life always surprises us. I came to celebrate, not to remember the past." Those firm but respectful words left the woman who had once despised her without a response. There was no need for reproaches or arguments. The true answer was in what Laura had become. Pedro, who had observed the scene, approached with an expression of regret. "Laura, I should never have let my mother interrupt our wedding. I failed you, and I know it." Laura listened to him in silence. Deep down, she still remembered the pain of that day, but she no longer felt resentment. She had learned to let go of what hurt her. With a firm voice, she responded, "You didn't just fail me, Pedro. You failed yourself. But I'm not here to judge you. I only hope you've learned what I learned, that a person's worth isn't measured by what they have, but by who they are." Pedro lowered his gaze, unable to bear his guilt. For the first time, he understood he had lost an extraordinary woman by allowing himself to be controlled by pride and fear. The news of Laura's transformation spread quickly among the guests. Everyone commented on her success, her strength, and the way she had risen from adversity. The woman who had once been rejected at the altar was now an example that life can change when you decide not to give up. As the hours passed, Laura said goodbye cordially and left the reception. Outside, under the starry sky, she breathed deeply. She felt that she had finally closed a wound that had accompanied her for years. Not because she needed others' approval, but because she herself had proven capable of writing her own story. She returned to her home with peace in her heart. She was no longer the young woman who depended on others' acceptance, but a free, respected, and powerful woman. Her story became an inspiration for many young people fighting poverty, women facing prejudice, and people who had lost hope. Everyone found in her the proof that dignity and effort can change any destiny. Over time, Laura expanded her businesses to other cities and created a foundation to support women in difficult situations. She never forgot where she came from and what she had suffered, but instead of using it as a burden, she transformed it into a source of strength. The phrase she always repeated to those who listened to her was simple but profound. Don't let anyone define your worth. What seems like defeat today can be the beginning of your greatest victory. Thus, Laura, the woman who was rejected on the most important day of her life, became a symbol of hope. Her mother-in-law, Pedro, and everyone who once despised her could never forget how the humble young woman from the town returned as someone rich, powerful, and above all, worthy of admiration. And although the past would always remain in her memory, Laura knew that the true victory wasn't having proved anything to others, but having proved to herself that life isn't about what you lost, but about what you're capable of building with courage, effort, and faith in yourself. Thank you for joining me in this story. If you enjoyed it and want to keep seeing more tales full of emotion and inspiration, subscribe right now and hit that notification bell. Here you'll always find stories that touch the heart.